Imagine being handcuffed, humiliated and treated as if she were nobody. Everything seemed lost for her. But when her husband arrived, something unbelievable happened. The police officers, who were previously in control, were suddenly in shock. What did he do to turn the tide in such an impactful way? Stay until the end, because this story will surprise you. Mariana woke up that morning with a light heart. The sun gently entered through the cracks in the curtain, and the feeling of happiness spread throughout my chest. It was a special day, a day of celebration. Ricardo, her husband, had just won an important case, one of those processes that could change the course of many lives. As a renowned judge, he dedicated hours and hours to his work, fighting for justice, and Mariana knew how much that moment meant to him. She wanted to celebrate this achievement in a special way. I had been thinking about giving him a sophisticated watch for some time, something that would symbolize his career and all the effort he had put into his career. So he decided that that would be the day. After work, he went to La Croix jewelry store, one of the most luxurious in the city, the kind of place where the windows sparkled as if they were untouched, where each piece seemed charged with an almost unattainable status. Mariana entered with firm steps, smelling expensive perfume, mixed with the impeccable shine of the room. She was no stranger to that kind of place, but even so, she immediately noticed the stares. The saleswomen looked at each other. The security guard, discreet, adjusted the radio attached to his uniform and positioned himself close to the door. Mariana pretended not to notice. Unfortunately, I was already used to this type of situation. He walked to a showcase and began to observe the watches on display. Minutes later, an employee approached. "These models are very exclusive. Are you sure you want to see this collection?" The tone was polite, but full of arrogance. Mariana smiled. She wouldn't let that reception shake her. "Yes, I want something special for my husband." The saleswoman hesitated. His eyes roamed Mariana from top to bottom, as if trying to fit her into a profile that simply didn't fit into that luxurious environment. He seemed to expect her to retreat, to feel out of place and give up. But when he realized that Mariana really wanted to buy, he forced a mechanical smile and started showing the pieces. "These models are the most exclusive in our collection," said the saleswoman, taking one of the velvet boxes with a practiced "in touch." Mariana looked at the options, carefully touching a gold bracelet with details of tiny stones. He felt the saleswoman's gaze piercing his gestures, as if he expected his hands to be rough, clumsy, unworthy of that touch. As she analyzed the jewelry, she noticed whispers among the other employees, small glances thrown in her direction, and quickly diverted when she caught them. The store's security guard, a tall, burly man, stood motionless next to the door, but his attention was focused solely on her. Mariana felt a chill run down her spine. The uncomfortable feeling of being watched made her stomach turn. She wasn't an ordinary customer in there. To them, it was a foreign body, a displaced presence, a potential threat. It was then that the store alarm went off. The shrill sound tore through the environment, silencing conversations and freezing movement around them. Customers stopped their purchases. Saleswomen looked at each other in confusion, but within seconds, all eyes turned to her. Mariana held her breath. His heart hammered against his chest. The security guard immediately reached for his belt as, if ready to act, the saleswoman who served her took a step back, almost as if Mariana were an animal about to attack. Then the store manager approached. Her expression was closed, her posture rigid like a judge about to pass sentence. "Ma'am, we're going to need to search your bag." The sentence felt like a punch in the stomach. "What? But why?" The manager crossed her arms impatiently as if she were dealing with a stubborn child. "It's just a safety procedure. It won't be long." The embarrassment was immediate. Mariana felt a wave of heat rise through her body. He looked around and saw the other customers watching the scene, some whispering among themselves, others simply staring with morbid curiosity. She swallowed hard. His first instinct was to refuse, but he knew that would only make things worse. He had nothing to hide. With trembling fingers, she opened the bag and placed it on the counter. If this happened to you, how would you react? Write in the comments. The manager picked it up unceremoniously, rummaging through each item with abrupt, impatient gestures. She took her wallet, opened it without permission, threw the keys and a lipstick aside, took out a small bottle of perfume, and rummaged through the lining of the bag. Mariana's objects were left haphazardly on the glass window, exposed as evidence of a crime that did not exist. She felt her eyes water, but she refused to blink. I wouldn't give anyone that taste. The silence was heavy. The manager closed the bag and pushed it back to Mariana. She waited for an apology, but instead the woman just stared at her with disdain. We'd better wait for the police. The world stopped. Police? Are you accusing me of theft? The manager raised an eyebrow and let out a small, sarcastic smile. We're just following protocol, ma'am. Mariana felt her heart accelerate in a way that felt like it was going to explode. The ground beneath his feet crumbled, and then, as if they were just waiting for their cue, 2 police officers entered the store. Was it her? Asked one of the officers, without even questioning the situation. The manager just confirmed with a nod. The policeman took a step forward. Come with us, ma'am. We need to take her to the police station. Mariana blinked in disbelief. He tried to argue, explain that this was an absurd mistake, but no one wanted to listen to her. The people around watched the spectacle in silence. No voices were raised. No customer dared to object. The humiliation was complete when they felt the need to handcuff her right there, in the middle of the store, in front of everyone. Cell phones were raised to film. Some customers murmured, others just recorded the scene as if they were watching any entertainment. The cold click of the cuffs around her wrists was like a snap inside her. And at that moment, Mariana felt the worst pain anyone can feel. The pain of injustice, the pain of being treated as invisible, the pain of realizing that, for those people, their dignity was worthless. The pain of injustice. Have you ever been through this or know someone who has? Write in the comments. The path to the police station seemed endless. The cold, shiny floor of the jewelry store reflected Mariana's distorted image, her heavy steps, dragged by shame. The metallic clang of the handcuffs, so loud in his ears, echoed with every small movement of his arms. She didn't dare lift her head. I didn't want to see the curious faces, the judgmental looks, the satisfied expressions of those who believed they were witnessing the capture of a criminal. But she felt it. He felt the eyes piercing his skin like sharp blades. Every employee, every customer, every person who crossed her path seemed to have frozen to watch her pass by. The saleswoman who had served her minutes before now had a satisfied smile on her lips, as if she had proved a point. The security guard, who had previously only watched her, now walked alongside the police officers, as if his suspicion had, after all, been confirmed. Humiliation burned inside Mariana like fire. His heart hammered in his chest, a chaotic mix of indignation, fear, and disbelief. How could that be happening? How in broad daylight, in a luxurious store, in front of so many witnesses, could she be being dragged like a criminal without evidence, without questioning, without even a chance to defend herself? He lacked air. Outside, the streets continued, as if nothing was happening. The contrast was cruel. While his world fell apart, cars passed by. People walked distractedly. Life continued impassively. But for those who noticed the scene, a handcuffed woman being led by police officers out of a high-end jewelry store, the judgment was instantaneous. A couple stopped on the sidewalk whispering to each other. A man in a suit glanced quickly. and then looked away, as if he didn't want to get involved. A group of teenagers pulled out their cell phones, recording without any shame. The click of one of them's camera sounded louder than anything. Mariana felt her stomach turn. It wasn't just the humiliation of the moment. It was certain that it wouldn't stay there, that those images would be posted, commented on, shared without context, without truth. What would they say about her? Woman is caught stealing from a jewelry store. Another thief caught in the act. She tried but couldn't escape. His entire body was shaking. The car was just ahead, the back door already open. When the police officers made her enter, Mariana had no choice. The leatherette of the seat was hot beneath her legs, and the smell of rust and sweat inside the car felt suffocating. The door closed with a loud bang, and then, as the vehicle began to move, a thought hit her hard. What if no one believed her? Inside the car, Mariana kept her gaze fixed on the window, watching the city lights pass by like shapeless blurs. The glass reflected his own face, his eyes wide, his expression of disbelief stamped like a scar. I tried to understand. I tried to mentally retrace every step, every minute inside that jewelry store. He entered politely, looked at the windows, chose some pieces, all in line with what any customer would do. At what point exactly had her simple trip to the store turned into this nightmare? How suddenly had he become the protagonist of a scene, worthy of a detective film, but without crime, without evidence, without logic? The car slowed down and stopped abruptly in front of the police station. A chill ran down his spine as he saw the grey concrete building, imposing and impersonal, like a monument to fear. The cold lights flickered, illuminating the facade in an almost cruel way, highlighting every crack and dark detail of the place. Outside, the hurried coming and going of police officers reinforced the feeling that she was entering a world with no escape. Mariana tried to take a deep breath, but her throat felt closed, as if the air itself was refusing to enter. His hands were shaking, still trapped by the cold, uncomfortable cuffs that marked his skin. The sound of the police car's doors unlocking echoed like a warning. Her heart pounded in her chest, racing, restless, as if it wanted to run away before her. Decision. Heavy footsteps of the agents approached. With no choice, Mariana felt a firm pull on her arm, forcing her to get out of the car. His eyes swept the environment, searching for any sign of hope, any trace that this could just be a passing nightmare. But all he found were curious and indifferent. Looks from those who had seen scenes like that countless times. She knew none of it was fair, but what could you do? Until a distinct sound cut through the air. Squealing tires, a black car stopping abruptly in front of the police station. And at that moment, everything began to change. The door opened. "Come on, Mom!" ordered one of the police officers, with no emotion in his voice. Mariana got out of the car with uncertain steps, feeling her legs wobble under the weight of humiliation. Her body felt like it wanted to shrink, disappear, but she forced herself to keep her head up. I wouldn't give anyone the pleasure of seeing it broken. Inside the police station, the atmosphere was even worse. The strong smell of reheated coffee and sweat permeated the air, the sound of phones ringing, keyboards being pressed and muffled. Conversations created a chaotic soundtrack. The officers led her down a narrow hallway to a cramped, windowless room, where an officer sitting behind a computer began the registration procedure. He didn't even look at her before asking, his voice. "Board, full name." "Mariana Ferreira Andrade," she replied, trying hard to keep her voice steady. The agent typed slowly, still without looking up. "Profession?" "Attorney." The word seemed to have weight. This time he looked up, and a flash of doubt crossed his face, Mariana noticed. "I want to call my lawyer," he declared, his tone irrefutable. The police officer hesitated, as if evaluating whether he should grant that right. Finally, he picked up a phone and handed it to her. With shaking hands, Mariana dialed the number of Camilla, her partner and best friend. The voice on the other side came quickly, worried. "Marie, did something happen?" Mariana swallowed. "I need you to come to the police station now. I was detained." The silence lasted a fraction of a second, but it was filled with tension. "I am on my way." Minutes later, Camilla burst through the police station door like a hurricane. His imposing stance made even the most experienced police officers flinch slightly. Her high heels clicked rhythmically against the floor, and her sharp gaze cut off anyone who dared to stare at her for more than 2 seconds. A renowned criminal lawyer, she knew exactly how to deal with situations like this, and made it clear that she would not tolerate absurdities. "I want to see the police report," he demanded bluntly. The officer behind the counter cleared, his throat visibly uncomfortable. "We are still drafting." "Great, then delete it, because this is a grotesque mistake." The sharp tone made the man falter. Camilla then looked at Mariana, her dark eyes filled with fury and concern. "Are you well?" Mariana tried to respond immediately, but her voice broke. He had to swallow the lump in his throat before insisting, "Yes, just—" He took a deep breath. "I just want to get out of here." Camilla turned back to the officers, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Do you have any concrete evidence against my client, or was she arrested based solely on the word of a store manager?" The silence in the room was awkward. No evidence, none blatant, no formal charges. "As I imagined. This is absurd, and you know it. Mariana will be released now, or we can talk about abuse of authority." The environment was charged with tension. The officers exchanged looks, as if they were looking for an answer they didn't have in each other. Then finally, one of them moved, pulled out the keys, and unlocked the handcuffs. The pressure of the metal disappearing from her wrists should have been a relief, but Mariana felt as if the marks were still there, burning her skin. Outside, she took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears. It wasn't just about being unjustly arrested, it was about everything that moment represented. The humiliation, the silent judgment, the look of contempt from those people who didn't even know her. Camilla held her hand, her grip firm, almost like a reminder that she wasn't alone. "It won't stay like that," he promised, with the conviction of someone who already knew exactly what to do. Mariana nodded. She still didn't know how, but she was sure of one thing: it wouldn't end there. Mariana felt her pulse racing as she left the police station. His steps were steady, but every cell in his body felt exhausted, as if he were carrying an invisible weight. The night air was cold, sharp, but nothing compared to the ice he felt inside him. It was a different coldness, born of indignation, of imposed shame, of the revolt that burned silently in his chest. Camilla walked beside him, her hands balled into fists. "I was furious." The sound of heels clicking against the asphalt sounded like a warning, a foreshadowing of the storm that was about to collapse on those who dared to humiliate Mariana. In the car, the silence was dense, full of unspoken promises. Camilla drove with her jaw clenched, her breathing heavy and controlled. Mariana watched the city pass by through the window, but everything seemed far away, as if it were no longer part of that world. Then, finally, Camilla spoke. "It won't stay like that, Mariana. Tomorrow, this entire police station will know who messed with." His voice was a sharp blade, but Mariana didn't respond, because, unlike her friend, she didn't just feel angry. It was something deeper. It was pain, an emptiness that grew and spread. Inside, suffocating, eating away at his dignity like a slow, relentless tide. It was an invisible but crushing weight that made his shoulders slouch slightly, as if he was carrying something that no one else could see. When they arrived at Mariana's house, the lights in the living room were on, casting flickering shadows across the curtains. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the male silhouette sitting on the couch. Richard, he was there, always was. As soon as the door opened, he jumped up, crossing the room in seconds. The air around him seemed to carry a palpable tension, as if something was about to explode. His dark eyes shone with contained fury, a silent warning that he already knew, that he already felt the injustice that had been done. But his face maintained its usual serenity, the mask of coldness that only those who knew him well could decipher. "I came as soon as I found out," he said, his voice deep, full of concern and something else, something dangerous. He approached without hesitation, holding Mariana's face between his hands with a delicacy that almost contradicted the turmoil that pulsed inside him. His fingers brushed her cold skin, and his eyes roamed over every feature of her face, as if needing to make sure she was really there, in one piece. "Are you well?" She wanted to say yes. I wanted to lie, pretend he was strong enough not to be shaken. But the moment he felt the heat of Ricardo's hands, the entire mask he was trying to maintain collapsed. The lump in her throat broke, and a lone tear escaped, sliding silently down her cheek. "They humiliated me, Ricardo," he whispered, his voice choked and trembling. "They treated me like dirt." For an instant everything around seemed silent. His eyes narrowed, and something deep and dark shone in his gaze. It wasn't just anger. It was a silent recognition. Ricardo knew that pain. He knew what it was like to be judged without a chance to defend himself. I knew what it was like to be reduced to nothing by eyes that insisted on seeing only what suited them. He knew because he had felt it before. And at that moment, something inside him broke. He took a deep breath, like someone fighting to contain a storm about to boil over, and placed a kiss on his wife's forehead. "I promise you, Mariana, this will not go unpunished." It wasn't just a promise. It was a sentence. That night, while Mariana tried to find sleep in her husband's strong embrace, Ricardo was already acting. Silent, meticulous, like a lurking predator. Because one thing was certain. Those who had dared to humiliate her would soon discover that they had messed with the wrong person. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he rarely used, a trusted contact, a prosecutor whose name carried weight in the courts, whose presence at hearings made opposing lawyers hesitate before speaking. A man who, like him, did not tolerate injustice and who, above all, knew exactly how to transform a seemingly common case into a devastating precedent for the guilty. The call was answered on the third ring. "Ricardo," the voice on the other, and sounded surprised. It was rare for him to make this kind of call. What there was, the judge wasted no time. "I need you on a case. An arbitrary arrest, without evidence, driven by pure prejudice." The answer came without hesitation, firm. As a verdict, "Send me all the details. We start tomorrow morning." Ricardo hung up, closing his eyes for a brief moment. He took a deep breath, letting the anger organize itself inside him. It wasn't just a feeling, it was fuel. They had just messed with the wrong woman. And now, they would pay the price. But Ricardo didn't stop there. While the prosecutor was preparing the legal basis to sue the police station and the jewelry store, he picked up the phone and made another strategic call. This time for a renowned journalist, a name known for his ability to expose injustices and pressure authorities with relentless stories. A professional who had already toppled entire careers with just one well-founded article. The call was answered almost immediately. "You're going to want to hear this story," he said, his voice cold and meticulously controlled. On the other end of the line, the reporter, always alert to cases of repercussion, adjusted his tone. "Say." Ricardo spared no details. He reported the brutal approach inside the jewelry store, the tone of contempt in the manager's voice, the satisfied look of the police officers as they tightened the cold handcuffs on Mariana's wrists. Public humiliation, the absence of evidence, The police officer's empty expression when drawing up a police report that shouldn't even exist. The journalist listened in silence. Each piece of information seemed to weigh more than the previous one. When Ricardo finished, the answer came quickly, without hesitation. "This needs to be published today." And it was. The next morning, the impact was immediate. Headlines began to appear on the internet, setting social networks on fire. "Woman is unjustly arrested in luxury jewelry store, case of racism and abuse of authority." "Client humiliated and handcuffed without evidence. How far does prejudice go? Until when?" Arbitrary arrest of lawyer generates outrage on the web. The effect was overwhelming. Social networks went into overdrive. Influencers began to share the case. Activists reported what happened, and Mariana received a flood of messages. Some were supportive, but others carried an even greater weight. Reports from people who went through similar situations, but who never had a voice. And now they had. The police station phones started ringing non-stop. The jewelry store, once a symbol of luxury and exclusivity, saw its reputation crumble like a sandcastle in the face of a tide of public outrage. Protests began to form in front of the establishment. Cameras from TV stations positioned themselves in front of the police station, demanding answers, and Ricardo knew this was just the beginning. The public demanded answers, justice, and above all, consequences. Mariana's case was no longer just an isolated story. It had become a symbol, a cruel reflection of a reality that many tried to ignore. Meanwhile, at the police station, the deputy's phone kept ringing. Newspapers, TV stations, human rights lawyers, politicians, everyone wanted explanations. The Internal Affairs Department was already involved, and the police officers who participated in Mariana's arrest began to realize that they had made a much bigger mistake than they imagined. One of the agents, nervous, murmured, passing his hand over his sweaty forehead. This turned into a nightmare. Another, in a cold sweat, mumbled, "How would we know she was married to a judge?" But the deputy, with a look of expression and eyes sparkling with irritation, slammed his hand hard on the table, making papers and pens jump with the impact. "The problem isn't who she's married to. The problem is that you made a serious mistake, and now shit has hit the fan." Silence hung in the air, thick as smoke. At the jewelry store's headquarters, chaos was absolute. The brand's CEO called an emergency meeting. The tension in the environment was suffocating. Directors, crisis advisors, lawyers, everyone was there, but no one seemed to have answers. The CEO leafed through the newspapers, throwing them on the table with disdain, while scrolling through social media. The hashtag #Justicia por Mariana grew at an absurd speed, accumulating millions of mentions. He looked at the security director, his eyes full of indignation. "This is ruining our reputation," he shouted, his voice echoing throughout the room. "Who is this security guard? Who authorized this absurd approach?" The director, pale and visibly nervous, adjusted his shirt collar, trying to justify himself. He acted on his own. Did you think that she... The CEO narrowed his eyes, his patience running out. "That she what?" he interrupted, his voice full of fury. "That she didn't seem to have money to buy jewelry, that she didn't fit the profile of our clients." The silence was deafening. Everyone there knew the answer, but no one had the courage to say it out loud. Because there was no justification that would alleviate the damage. In a desperate attempt to contain the crisis, a statement was written and published in record time. The jewelry store announced that the security guard had been fired and that they were conducting an internal investigation. But it was too late. Public opinion had already condemned them. Sales plummeted. Old customers promised to boycott. Celebrities who had already appeared in the brand's campaigns announced their breakup. Lawyers were already considering million-dollar lawsuits for moral damages. The company was trying to stop a bleeding that didn't seem to end. On the other side of town, at the police station where Mariana was taken, the pressure only increased. The State Police Internal Affairs Department had already opened an inquiry to investigate the agent's conduct. The police chief, previously confident and arrogant, now felt the weight of his hasty decision. The calls came from above, from far above, and then came the most awaited news. The prosecutor contacted by Ricardo obtained an emergency hearing. In less than 48 hours, the case was in the hands of the Court of Justice. In court, Mariana entered with her head held high. She was no longer the humiliated woman in the jewelry store. Now she was someone who fought not only for herself, but for everyone who had ever gone through something similar and been silenced. She sat next to her husband and his lawyer. On the other side, the police officers responsible for his arrest were tense. The weight of justice was about to fall upon them, and this time there would be no escape. The judge, an experienced man with a sharp eye, read the accusations, analyzed the evidence, and, most importantly, watched the video that was circulating. On the internet, the silence in the room was absolute. Then the magistrate closed the document folder and declared, "There is no justification for this truculent and vexatious approach. This case is not just about a mistake, but about an abuse of power motivated by prejudice." The deputy swallowed hard. "In view of the facts presented, I order the immediate suspension of the agents involved, in addition to the opening of a case for abuse of authority." The crack of the judge's gavel echoed through the courtroom. It was the sound of justice, but it didn't stop there. As for the victim, Mariana Ferreira Andrade, she has the right to file a lawsuit for moral damages against the state and the commercial establishment that allowed this arbitrariness. Mariana took a deep breath. 1. As she left the courtroom, she was greeted with applause. Journalists jostled to record his words. She faced the cameras and said in a firm and confident voice, "This isn't just for me. It's for everyone who has gone through this and been silenced. Enough of accepting the unacceptable." The crowd went wild. The jewelry company tried to recover, but the damage to its image was irreversible. Shares plummeted, customers stayed away. And shortly afterwards, some stores had to close due to falling sales. The police officers were prosecuted. The security guard, publicly exposed, disappeared from social media. And Mariana, she became a symbol, an example of courage, and I knew from then on that I would never again remain silent in the face of injustice. Comment below if you liked the story. I'm waiting for us to talk about the video. And sign up now so you don't miss the next one.